Gemini, this week you won't be the problem, but you'll finally understand who you were. Gemini, has your mind been spinning faster than usual, trying to solve a riddle that seems to have no answer? What if I told you this week, you won't be the problem, but you will come face to face with a version of yourself you didn't even realize was still running the show? You, of all signs, understand the duality of life. You know how to hold contradictions, dance between truths, and adapt when others collapse. But something has been gnawing at you lately, hasn't it? A sense that you've been misunderstood, misrepresented, or worse, manipulated. I'm Elizabeth, your guide here at Esoteric Wisdom. And today, I need you to listen not just with your brilliant mind, but with your inner knowing, the one that Mercury, your ruling planet, has been quietly activating behind the scenes. The cosmic mirror is about to turn, and this time, it won't reflect who others said you were. It will show you who you truly were and why that version is no longer needed. If you've been feeling like something isn't quite right, like there's a piece missing from the puzzle, stay with me. The signs you're about to see won't just validate your gut instincts. They'll liberate them. Like, comment, and subscribe if you feel that shift stirring already. But most importantly, don't look away. Because once the mask drops, your real power begins. Chapter 1. The Mirror Cracks, a Gemini Awakening begins. Gemini, you were never afraid of information. In fact, you crave it. You absorb patterns, track details, and sense nuance like no other. But what happens when the information you've been fed was filtered through someone else's lens? What happens when you realize the story you've been telling yourself wasn't even yours to begin with? This week, Mercury, your planetary ruler, is forming a piercing trine with Pluto. It's not just a cosmic alignment. It's an energetic spotlight aimed directly at what's been hidden. Suddenly, a phrase, a slip in conversation, or a quiet realization will unravel a thread. And once you pull it, the whole tapestry of a relationship, memory, or self-concept may begin to fall apart. For months, maybe years, you've carried the burden of feeling like the unreliable narrator in your own story. You questioned your instincts, minimized your emotions, overanalyzed your decisions. Why? Because someone subtly suggested, in actions more than words, that you were the problem. They were charming, convincing, maybe even worried about you. And in your Gemini way, wanting to keep harmony, craving intellectual connection, you internalized their narrative. Let me tell you something powerful. This week, the narrative breaks. There's a moment coming, perhaps in the form of an accidental message, a shared memory that doesn't match their version, or even a dream that will pierce through the fog. A mental click will echo in your chest. You'll realize you weren't chaotic. You were being gaslit. A woman I worked with, let's call her Lisa, was a Gemini in her late 50s. A school principal, brilliant and intuitive, but constantly doubting herself. For years, her sister blamed her for family breakdowns, claiming Lisa was too intense, too confrontational. But then Lisa found old emails, evidence of betrayals that confirmed everything she had felt but couldn't prove. In 1 week, her entire self-concept shifted. She said, "I realized I wasn't broken. I was breaking free. And you will, too." This week is your Lisa moment. The veil lifts. But it doesn't just show you who manipulated the mirror. It shows you the version of you who accepted it. That's the more confronting truth, isn't it? But don't run from it, Gemini. Use it. Mercury is empowering you to re-narrate your truth, not as a reactive wound, but as a conscious rewrite. That version of you, the one who stayed quiet, overfunctioned, or tried too hard to be the smart one to earn approval, was never wrong. She was just surviving. And now she's done. Let this realization come. Let the emotions surge: anger, grief, disbelief. You don't need to categorize or contain them. For once, you don't need to explain your feelings to make them valid. You just need to honor that your inner compass has always been right. It was just waiting for you to stop outsourcing your truth to people who benefited from your confusion. You won't be the problem this week, Gemini, but you will uncover the parts of you who thought they had to be. And once that awareness lands, the rest of this journey becomes a reclamation, not just of your truth, but of your voice. Now, are you ready to go deeper? Chapter 2. the voice returns, reclaiming the Gemini narrative. Gemini, your words are your magic, but what happens when someone rewrites your truth for you? For so long, you've been the master of connection. You read the room. You pivot. You adjust. You know how to speak in ways that keep peace, invite possibility, and protect vulnerability. But what no one tells you is that this adaptability, the gift of Mercury's touch, can become a trap when you're in the hands of someone who uses that gift against you. This week, as Mercury aligns with Pluto and Mars activates your sector of identity, your voice won't just return, it will sharpen. Not to wound, but to cut away the fog. A fog that was carefully cultivated by someone who needed you to doubt yourself to maintain control. Let me ask you something personal. Have you ever found yourself apologizing in situations where you weren't at fault, just to avoid conflict? Have you ever replayed a conversation over and over, wondering if you were too much, too loud, too emotional, too unpredictable? That was never you. That was their conditioning of you. And Mercury is furious. Furious at how long your mind has been made to orbit someone else's emotional gravity. Furious at how your dual nature, curious, empathetic, searching, was labeled as inconsistency instead of brilliance. And most of all, furious that your words were once used against you. But this week, that changes. There is a conversation coming. It may be subtle or explosive. It may begin in a grocery store aisle, in the quiet of a phone call, or in a letter you never send. But it will be the moment where your words no longer bend. You will name what happened, not with rage, but with the crystalline clarity of someone who has finally remembered who they are. And when you speak, everything shifts. A Gemini man I once counseled, John, a retired Navy linguist, shared with me that after years of being manipulated by a close friend, he finally snapped. But not in anger, in awareness. I stopped editing my truth to protect his feelings, he said. And I watched him crumble. Not because I was cruel, but because I was finally clear. That's your path, Gemini. Not revenge. Not silence. Clarity. But before that can happen, you must forgive the version of you who didn't speak up. She wasn't weak. She was surviving. She was choosing peace over chaos because she believed the battle would cost more than the wound. And maybe it would have then, but not now. The stars are aligning to give you a voice so grounded, so sharp, so undeniable that even those who once twisted your story will have no choice but to acknowledge the truth. And here's the real transformation. You don't need their acknowledgement anymore. When Mercury, your ruler, is empowered, you don't just speak. You rewrite. You revise the roles others assign to you. You restore the nuance. You reclaim the agency that was taken through suggestion, guilt, and manipulation. So this week, Gemini, you don't have to yell. You don't have to convince. You just have to remember. Your voice is not a problem. Your voice is your proof. And now, the truth you speak becomes the foundation you stand on. Ready for what happens when that truth meets action? Chapter 3, Gemini's Mirror. The revelation that reflects who you've always been. Gemini, what if I told you that the person you've been chasing, healing, defending, was a distorted mirror of who you once feared you were? Let that land. Because this week, the mirror cracks, and what emerges isn't who they said you were. It's who you truly are. As Mercury enters a powerful sextile with Neptune, your spiritual insight heightens. Not in the way of vivid dreams or mystic omens, though those may come too, but through subtle emotional flashbacks. Conversations, encounters, moments from years ago that you suddenly see differently. Not through their lens, but through your own awakened mind. And with every flash of clarity, one truth becomes louder. You were never the chaos. You were the catalyst. The difference? Chaos tears things down. Catalyst transforms. And that's exactly what you've been doing all along. Transforming quietly, adapting bravely, surviving creatively. Gemini, you've been told that your duality is instability. But this week proves the opposite. It's your duality that allows you to stand in two worlds, observe both shadow and light, and walk away choosing wholeness. Let me offer a reflection. Years ago, I worked with a Gemini woman named Sherry. an ER nurse, and single mother. Brilliant, fast-thinking, deeply compassionate. But for nearly a decade, she stayed in a relationship with someone who constantly told her she was too much. Too emotional, too distracted, too intense. She believed him. Until one day, in the middle of a mundane argument, she looked at him and said, "You don't get to label what you don't understand." It was in that moment that she saw. He wasn't defining her. He was deflecting from himself. That's the kind of realization you're walking into now. Someone in your orbit, maybe a partner, a parent, a peer, has used your openness as a cover for their avoidance. They allowed you to take the blame for dynamics they created. And you, being the ever-evolving Gemini, tried to fix it from within yourself. But the mirror is breaking. You're about to see that their reflection of you wasn't yours. It was their projection. And when that moment arrives, whether through a text that hits wrong, a conversation that exposes a pattern, or a silence that suddenly feels louder than words, you'll know it's time to let go. Of what? Of the false narratives. Of the roles you were cast in without consent. Of the belief that peace must always come through self-sacrifice. Because, Gemini, true peace is born from truth. And you're finally choosing truth over comfort. You may feel disoriented at first, like waking from a dream where you believed you were someone else. But stay with that feeling. Breathe into it. Let it pass through you. Because what comes next is not a breakdown, it's a breakthrough. As Mercury continues to rule your sign with razor-sharp lucidity, it gifts you the rare ability to name what others can't even see yet. You'll be the first to speak the truth in the room. And while some will resist it, others will thank you, silently or aloud, because your courage gives them permission to do the same. You're not just reclaiming your identity. You're becoming the mirror that reflects truth back to others. And no one can manipulate what you now see clearly. This isn't just a cosmic moment. It's a soul alignment. You've been carrying a weight that was never yours, and this week, you set it down. Not with bitterness, but with relief. You were never the problem. But now you finally know who was, and more importantly, who you are. Gemini, are you ready to live from that place of clarity? Chapter 4, Gemini's Clean Break, the exit that heals generations. Gemini, when the truth becomes undeniable, so does the need to act. And this is where your story turns. Because up until now, you've danced between understanding and forgiving, questioning and explaining, hoping and doubting. But this week, the stars aren't asking you to wait for more signs. They're handing you the pen and saying, finish the chapter. Let's not soften it. A clean break is coming. And it's not just a departure from someone. It's a departure from a version of yourself that tolerated just enough pain to keep peace at the cost of your power. As Mercury, your ruling planet, aligns with Saturn in a rare karmic aspect, you're not only receiving clarity, you're being handed closure. Saturn doesn't play with illusions. It demands integrity. And this configuration forces you to examine who in your life has been benefiting from your emotional elasticity while giving you very little in return. The insight you gain now feels less like revelation and more like recognition. You've known for a while that something didn't sit right. The story kept repeating. The feelings came back like clockwork. And now, with your internal compass finally pointing due north, you can't unsee what you've seen. So let me ask you this. Are you prepared to walk away even if no one applauds you for it? Because sometimes the most courageous healing happens without an audience. Take the story of Brian, a Gemini from Baltimore I once coached. For over 10 years, he worked under a mentor who subtly undermined him, praising him in public, gaslighting him in private. Brian, loyal to a fault, stayed through promotions that never came and promises that were never kept. Until one day, during a budget meeting, he watched this mentor take credit for his biggest idea yet. Brian didn't explode. He didn't beg. He quietly slid his resignation across the table the next day, with no backup job in hand. People thought he was impulsive, reckless even. But 2 months later, he launched his own consulting firm and landed his first 6-figure client. You see, Gemini, when a life falls apart, the soul gets space to breathe again. That's where you are now. This break you're being guided toward, It's not an act of rebellion. It's an act of liberation. And the moment you stop justifying why you stayed, you start creating space for what's always wanted to find you. Love without conditions, opportunity without sabotage, friendships that feel like calm, not survival. This week, your nervous system will notice it first. You'll breathe easier around certain people and feel tightness, dread, or exhaustion around others. That's not coincidence. That's your body's way of whispering, this person's chapter is over. Honor that. You don't need to slam the door, but you do need to close it. Set the boundary. Have the conversation. Block the number if needed. Not out of spite, but out of sacred protection for the version of you who no longer fits inside a story built on guilt. The most powerful decisions you'll make this week won't require anyone's approval. They'll simply require your self-respect. Because, Gemini, you are not here to be understood by people committed to misunderstanding you. You are not here to explain your growth to those who fear their own. And you are certainly not here to carry the karmic patterns your ancestors already bled over trying to fix. This is your clean break. This is your healing. This is your cue to leave, not just the room but the role. You were never meant to stay small just to keep others comfortable. Now the question becomes, what will you build with the freedom you just reclaimed? Chapter 5, Gemini's Resurrection. Rebuilding from the truth up. Gemini, what happens after the break? Not the emotional aftermath, but the silence that follows. That strange, almost sacred stillness that settles in after the mask has fallen, after the illusions have cleared, and after you finally chose yourself. This isn't just relief, it's resurrection. You are not who you were 7 days ago. You are no longer tangled in the blame. No longer apologizing for sensing something others insisted wasn't real. No longer trying to decode emotional puzzles that were never yours to solve. And for the first time in a long time, you're beginning to see what life looks like when you stop shrinking to fit someone else's comfort zone. Here's the truth most won't say out loud. Revelation is only half the battle. Healing begins after clarity, in the reconstruction. And Gemini, with Mercury guiding you like a lantern through shadowed hallways of your past, you're not just rebuilding, you're redefining everything. Who are you when you're not performing harmony? Who are you when you're not the witty peacekeeper, the adaptable fixer, the endlessly forgiving one? This week, your soul doesn't want small answers. It wants reinvention. And the planets support it. Mercury conjunct Uranus opens a channel of radical new thought. Unexpected insights arrive like lightning bolts. Old dreams resurface. Wild, unexplainable ideas suddenly make sense. Don't dismiss them. This is the moment your multidimensional mind becomes your most sacred tool, not for pleasing others, but for envisioning yourself beyond survival. Start by rewriting the internal script. That voice that said, "You're too much," becomes, "I was always just enough for the right room." That belief that said, "I have to earn love," becomes, "I deserve love that doesn't need translation." This isn't toxic positivity. This is emotional recalibration. You are updating your system. And yes, it will be disorienting. You may feel tired. You may feel spaced out. You may even feel bored. That's okay. You're detoxing from the drama of being someone else's emotional regulator. You're withdrawing from the addiction of chaos masked as closeness. Let it pass. And then begin again. Create a new daily ritual, even if it's small. Speak to yourself kindly, even if the words feel foreign. Unfollow people who profit from your uncertainty. Reclaim your voice where it was silenced. This might mean writing again, singing again, speaking truth in conversations where you once bit your tongue. Let this new version of you be loudly honest. Gemini, remember this. Clarity is not cold. Boundaries are not betrayal. And walking away doesn't make you the villain in someone else's distorted story. You've spent enough time doubting your wisdom, apologizing for your instincts, over-explaining your exits. Now let your actions speak for you. Let your life become the proof of everything your intuition whispered when no one else believed it. In the mirror, you will begin to recognize someone familiar but upgraded. Still curious, still compassionate, but no longer compromising their light to make others less afraid of the truth. This is your resurrection. Not with fireworks or fanfare, but with quiet certainty that the path ahead is yours to design, with intention and with no apologies. So, Gemini, as you stand at the threshold of this new beginning, ask yourself, what do I finally have the courage to create now that I no longer need to explain who I am? And maybe the most healing thing you'll realize is this: you didn't lose them. You found you. Conclusion: the Gemini redemption arc. Gemini, now that the mask is off and the mirror is clean, can you see yourself clearly? Not the version they projected on you. Not the character you played to keep the peace. But the you who survived misunderstanding, who decoded manipulation, who stood quietly at the edge of self-doubt and still chose truth. This week wasn't about drama. It was about return. Not to a person, not to the past, but to yourself. Because in the end, clarity is love. And this clarity, it's your liberation. You're no longer carrying stories that don't belong to you. You've stopped rehearsing for roles that kept you trapped in someone else's narrative. And finally, you're rewriting the script with wisdom, with wit, with wild, unapologetic grace. Let this be the moment your heart and your mind shake hands and agree. No more shrinking. No more silence. No more self-abandonment in the name of harmony. Your ruling planet, Mercury, has walked you through illusion and truth alike. And now, it offers you the power to speak life into your new chapter.
So speak, Gemini.
Speak boundaries.
Speak vision.
Speak softness where there was once blame. Speak fire where there was once fear. You were never meant to be the problem. You were always meant to be the proof that healing can look like revelation, that peace can rise from painful endings, that reinvention is sacred. And the ones who tried to rewrite your story, they never saw this version of you coming. Now, my dear soul walker, if this message found you at the perfect time, it wasn't by accident. Like this video if your spirit feels seen. Comment below. I remember who I am now. Subscribe to Esoteric Wisdom if you're ready for weekly soul navigation and divine downloads. Share this with someone who needs to hear that truth is a beginning, not an end. You were not the problem. You were the portal. And now, the door is open. Welcome home, Gemini.